In the Pacific in World War II, dedication. Evils on Earth again in World War II. If God allows it, we stand against him. If human nature, we're still against it. It's up to the Allies to crush Axis. In retrospect, the USS Enterprise aircraft carrier, CV-6, had but one purpose in life, which was to take the lead in demolishing the Japanese Imperial Navy in sea battles across the Pacific in World War II, with the help of her sister carriers and support ships. In Hawaii in 1971, I stood atop the crater called the Punch Bowl and toasted with wine those buried below in the National Cemetery of the Pacific. Thinking that I would someday write about the Allied Navy's role in World War II, especially the aircraft carriers and the metal of the men melded to the metal of those ships. The expected battleship slugouts would never come to pass. Those days were over. Besides, we had no more battleships after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Air power was in. The USB Dauntless dive bombers were hardly stoppable. All our other aircraft were near obsolete, as had been our battleships. To the east, I could see the other big crater, Diamond Head, one usually thought to be thin, per its profiled face to the beaches, but it is round inside and is also a park and a festival site. To the west, I could see Pearl City and its famous harbor, where the Japanese made the gravest mistake of their lives, awakening the industrial might of a sleeping giant. To the south, I could see the airport and its new reef runway. To the north, there were endless sugarcane fields and the mighty North Shore surfing waves crashing. For those displaced, especially the Chinese. From life we once drew wine, now dregs to drink, then flaunted silk, but now in tatters shrink. Such changes wisdom holds of slight account to those who stand on death's appalling brink. Omar Khayyam retransmographed.
In November 1941, the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise was put on a war footing by its vigilant captain, Bull Halsey, in preparation for ferrying Marine aircraft to Wake Island. All the dummy ammunition was taken away, and the magazines were stocked to the brim with live shells. Halsey further declared that he would sink any Japanese ships encountered, this to the great surprise of his staff, who pointed out that war had not yet been declared with Japan. The Bull brushed them off, living up to his nickname. In late November 1941, USS Enterprise set out with the planes to deliver to Wake Island. She lost a day crossing the international date line, and some of the sailors perhaps wondered where the date went. On the return trip, December 5th occurred twice, and so now time had paid them back. Enterprise was due into Pearl Harbor late in the evening on December 6th, 1941. The sailors had envisioned a glorious weekend ashore, especially a big Saturday night and a peaceful Sunday to recuperate. They might find some girls in downtown Honolulu on Hotel Street, even renting them for a long time instead of the usual short time, or dance with the USO girls at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel where the pilot stayed. They could swim and surf on the last of the world's open beaches too, and hobnob with the tourists and the VIPs. Since Europe and much of Asia were closed, anyone who was anyone was in Waikiki, freed of most of their cares and worries, the surf flowing in and around them on the last winter beaches in the world, at the last resort. USS Enterprise and her fleet, now just 2 days away from Pearl, encountered severe storms, she soon having to halve her speed. For the men of the Thin Tin Can destroyers could not take the pounding of the tremendous waves. She was now due into Pearl late on Sunday the 8th, to the dismay of the crew.
USS Enterprise couldn't see the huge Imperial Japanese naval attack fleet heading toward Pearl Harbor, nor could they be seen by it. They were as the proverbial two fleets passing in the night. But it is more that the Japanese fleet was north, and the American fleet was south, both heading east. Radar was still in its infancy, although Enterprise had a primitive version of it. Early Sunday morning on December 7, 1941, Nagumo and Admiral Yamamoto launched 384 aircraft from 6 aircraft carriers. The fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Hiryu, Soryu, and the larger supercarriers, Shokaku and Zuikaku. The Enterprise fleet, due into Pearl Harbor on December 6, 1941, was delayed by storms and sneaks in on the 8th, the sinking Arizona still burning. She refuels and restocks in 7 hours, amid the destruction of the battleships, Halsey noting that Japanese language will one day be spoken only in hell. Yamamoto now feels free to conquer the Pacific Islands and Australia, not realizing he'd made what would come to be his worst foe, the Grey Ghost, the Enterprise. She'd be reported sunk by Japan 4 times, but she'd dare return from the grave to haunt. The Navy had switched to its carrier base with Yorktown, Hornet, Lexington, and Saratoga. Yorktown and her fleet headed for the Panama Canal, and Saratoga raced from San Diego. Lexington and Saratoga were of an earlier class from the late 1920s, sturdily built but slow to maneuver, being massive monoliths. This great size even considering the recent but now ending biplane age. Enterprise, Yorktown, and Hornet were triplet sister ships of the same Yorktown class, begun in the mid-1930s, although the Hornet was still in Norfolk, awaiting her commission, and the Yorktown was just recently patrolling the Atlantic for German submarines. Hornet's crew was green, while the crews of the Enterprise and the Yorktown were old hands.
After the Pearl Harbor attack, the aircraft carriers Enterprise and Lexington guarded Hawaii from further attacks for 2 months, which time also allowed the buildup of naval strength. But the Japs stayed away after much debate in their ranks, for they feared that their supply lines would be stretched too thin. They began planning to take Midway Island instead, to seal the deal, and to also consolidate their gains in the east and cut off Australia. In January 1942, Saratoga was hit by a Japanese torpedo and sailed back to San Diego for repairs. In February 1942, the Allies raided the Japanese-held Marshall Islands, then retreated the best they could do, for they couldn't stick around to suffer the Japanese armada. However, it was stunning success.